Hi guys, it's Lucy. So in this video, we're going to talk about The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. And I came across this book after first reading Babel that the author published earlier this year. And in Babel, the piece of Chinese history that was being roped in was the Opium Wars. And within the Poppy War, there's a little bit of historical reference to the rape of Nanking, of course, disguised in the context of, a fantasy war in a fantasy city in a fantasy world in fantasy context. Like everything has been disguised in a way, but the author did say in the interviews that a lot of actual stories of the war and the crimes that were being committed within the city, those were lifted almost some of it directly, word for word from historical references. So some of them are listed in the book itself for those interested in Chinese history. So again, I think this is an excellent author when it comes to true representation. Kind of, what I mentioned about Babel as well. In terms of world building and the actual story, this is awesome. I like this way better than something like Mistborn series. That is quite a cult classic within the fantasy world, but I think this is so much better. Even though I've only read the first book, I'm saving the second and third book, kind of like how I save Murakami books, because I know they are standouts and I know like it'll get me out of a rut if I ever fall into a reading rut. So that's how good this is. The main character is Rin. She's a girl. She's a very headstrong, stubborn character that is a little bit of a black horse, I suppose. Is that the phrasing? In how she was, in her upbringing. She's not born into a wealthy family. She's basically a peasant, but perhaps a Spearly, which is like the race that was basically got shafted in this fantasy context. But all in all, I find it fascinating that the author wrote about an underprivileged female character in such a way that she becomes the hero of the trilogy, or at least in the book. And it's fascinating at the very, very end. I think this is actually the last page that I sort of see the outline for the whole book if it was done in that sense. Some of the sentences here. She made her choices fully and autonomously, referring to the main character. And she was no victim of destiny, etc., etc. Like a lot of references to the gods that she calls upon, in that fantasy context. But this emphasis on individual power over, your own destiny is quite interesting, because it's a very immigrant mentality to begin. It's almost a little bit it's very almost different than a true Chinese mentality, because there's always a focus on group choices and group power, and the classicism, or the class divide, is a very real problem, and was, at least, that was why the Cultural Revolution was trying to upturn that whole idea of people being stuck in classes. But I feel like even today there is still that sort of mentality where you are born into a certain social circle, and that influences all of your decisions and all of your life. And that's exactly what this book kind of describes, that Rin was the character breaking through all of that. And the premise of it is a very Western idea. It's a focus on the individual. So I find that interesting, that dissection, that she is talking about an Asian character in an Asian fantasy context, but yet still this whole personal journey, this discovery of self-growth, or becoming oneself, and just growing up in that way. Like all of that character development is still a very Western. This is still a very Western piece of work. That's just laced with pieces of Chinese history, which I don't mind. And I do quite enjoy it, but I feel this is an Asian themed book for white people, because this is what Western stories do, where they over amplify the individual and overemphasize the impact of personal choice. I think that's an illusion. That's what I'm alluding to, but don't want to say quite upfront. But that's a controversial opinion. Anyway, let me know what you think. Overall, this is an awesome read. Very fast to read for me because it was so good. Extremely well written, and from someone so young and is appreciative of Chinese history. So I feel very happy to have come across the author and see that this book and her work being touted as huge successes in our culture. Let me know what you think, and have a great day, guys. Bye.